This is an important moment in your life. Pay attention to this. Every ancient civilization that you will study, including the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Hindus, the Buddhists, every ancient civilization, including Christianity and Judaism, they have the same origin, so call it Christianity. The same story of creation, which starts with the creator or God creating the universe with sound and resonance and frequency, with the spoken word. But they just describe it differently. They use a slightly different description to describe that event or that sequence of events. In Christianity, we have, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light. But it says the Spirit of God moved over the waters. So for a long time, I was wondering, okay, so nothing is in creation. God hasn't even said, let there be light, but there's already water. Where's the water? There's no universe. There's nothing. There's the void. There can't even be a void. There's no firmament. There's no matter, but there's water. Water is matter. It's hydrogen and oxygen. And I started to realize, hold on. There's something very special and very important about this combination of elements, water and hydrogen. And it certainly is. I don't want to get sidetracked by that. Just focus on water for a little bit. For people that want to do some research, look at water, because when you start understanding what water is, the molecular structure of water, the importance of water, the importance of hydrogen, oxygen, and if you add one more or two more elements to that, you add silica and carbon to that. Now you have the holy grail of everything in creation. But the first opening phrase of the Bible is literally a crash course in quantum mechanics. And people don't realize it. But the crash course in quantum mechanics creates a problem for us, because it shows us that we don't live in an electromagnetic universe. We live in a magneto-electric universe. And there's a huge difference between the two, because the Bible says, just like pretty much every other ancient civilization says, that the God created the word, and the Bible says, and God said, let there be light. So it was the sound and resonance of creation, the word of God or the creator, which is vibration, resonance, and frequency, that creates what? What does sound and moving sound create? Creates, and vibration and resonance creates magnetic fields. And what do moving magnetic fields do? Because vibration can't stand still, it has to move. So what do moving magnetic fields do? They create electromagnetic fields, which is light. So it tells us that light comes from sound. And when I saw that, when I discovered that, when that penny dropped for me, I realized it's not the light that's so important. It is the sound that is so important, because without sound, resonance, and frequency, there can be no light. Light is a consequence of sound, resonance, and frequency. Vibrations. They're all aspects of each other. We call it sound on Earth because the things we hear comes from vibration and resonance that moves air. It's all the same thing. That one creates the consequence of the other, or is the consequence of the other. And that's when I realized that the speed of light is not the finite thing. And this is why they've been pushing it in science, that nothing can move faster than the speed of light. That's the lie and the BS they've been selling us. And so many people still believe that. You know, it's been shown so many times before. And I've spoken about this in my lectures for nearly 10 years now. Sound travels infinitely faster than the speed of light. That's part of the propaganda and the lie of our education system. Because if children were taught that that is not true, how they would enter life and adult life and university or research, if they knew what's really going on. And this, by the way, affects the quantum mechanics and the particle physics study incredibly at every possible level. Because now we start dealing with magnetic fields, with electromagnetic fields, and we start dealing with toroidal fields, torsion fields, vortex fields, which are all the same thing, just different names, and how they create light, and how they create gravity, and how they create anti-gravity effects, and how they create polarization, how they create positive and what we've come to call positive and negative charges, which is all just magnetic fields moving in opposite directions to create a stable toroidal balanced magnetic field. But they don't teach us this. When they teach us that we live in an electromagnetic universe, we'll go, wow, it's amazing. But it's a subtle deception, because it's a magneto-electric universe. The magnetism comes before the light. So if we grew up believing that light comes from, as a consequence of sound and magnetism, we get light, we'd see physics and science and cosmology very differently. At some point, some stage, some omnipotent field of consciousness, you can call it God, the creator, I don't know. I just ended up calling it God. I've come the long way around. You know, for many years, I was scared to call it God because God had so many different connotations and religious connotations and so forth. And eventually now I just said, you know what? It's God. It's God, the creator of everything in the universe. We can't put a name to it. We just know that everything that exists here is not a consequence of tiny little particles bumping into each other randomly, all over the place and creating everything in creation. Because remember, that's the story that they're trying to teach us in evolution. From the simplest amoeba and just like billions of particles, where the Big Bang comes and these billions of particles, an infinite number of particles, just bump into each other randomly, and out of those particles bumping into each other, suddenly they create everything. This is really important. This is why Slave Species of God is such an important book. Although it is quite dated now and a lot of stuff needs to change, the basic foundation of this, the basic premise, it still stands, which is the most important premise. And this is why the word God is spelled with a small g on the original book. Slave Species of God with a small g, not God with a big G. Because it seems like the Anunnaki were the beings that had the knowledge of genetic manipulation, genetic engineering, the way we have today. We're cloning species, we're doing shit that people don't even know is happening, genetic labs and biolabs and so forth. We know how to clone things and clone humans and clone creatures. So did the Anunnaki. They knew this millions of years ago. And so they cloned a new species. And it seems everything points to the fact that we are the species, or we're the descendants of the species that they created. And that's why it's spelled with a small g. Just because you got the knowledge of genetic manipulation doesn't mean you created the heavens and the earth. And there's a big difference. So the Slave Species of God, the most important job that book does is to draw the distinction between God with a big G and the gods with a small g. The book of Enoch was part of the Bible. The book of Enoch really goes to some extremes. I mean, he says that the large giants were 3,000 ells. 3,000 ells tall. Now an ell is from there to there, so that's about half a meter. So a 3,000 ell giant would be 1,500 meters tall. And now this is not just a little guy. Now we're talking about some very big people. If you do come across the story of giants, pay attention. Read as much as you can, absorb that information, make notes, write it down, and go and research it. Because you'll find every ancient civilization, their oral history, their oral tradition talks about giants in great detail. And different giants. We're talking about the small ones, like Anunnaki, that were maybe 2 or 3 times the size of humans. We talk the slightly larger ones that are like 15, 20, 40 meters. Then we got the 100-meter giants. Then we got the 300-meter giants. And we got the 500-meter giants. Then we get the big ones, the 1.5 kilometer tall giants. And all of them played a different role, and they had different reasons why they existed. And again, I don't want to get stuck in that detail, but I've studied that in great detail in the research that I've done in the ancient civilizations here in South Africa, where we've done all kinds of spiritual and shamanic journeys and connected with the ancestors and connected with the spirits and the guardians of the ancient sites. And let me tell you what, when you start doing that work and you start getting consistent results that support each other, there comes a time where you have to say, okay, this is no longer coincidence, or somebody is just making the story up. Because when you start getting consistent stories and consistent information, this one that is completely disconnected from that source of information, but they support each other, then you got to start believing that this is no longer a coincidence, but a scientific fact. I believe that the Bible is full of incredible knowledge and information, has incredible knowledge encoded in it. And overwritten on top of that is what I call the soap opera. The soap opera story that they write on top of it. And that's where the confusion comes. People get lost in the soap opera drama of the Bible, and they went there and then they stayed there for 3 days and 5 nights and then 40 days there and this and he said this and she said that, and then they slaughtered a sheep and then they were unhappy, but in between, woven into that, is the really important information and the numbers, the numerology, the specific sequence of events that you can extract a huge amount of information, but that's below the subtext. That's the subtext below the surface soap opera that I've started calling it. And one of my great examples, my favorite examples of the Bible is the very opening line. And it is consistent with every ancient civilization creation story. This is all information has been taken out of the Sumerian texts. And, we've got to be grateful for the people that have translated those Sumerian clay tablets that spent years and years researching it and translating it, decoding it, and then going through all the hard work to share that information. And Zechariah Sitchin was one of those people. I believe now that Zechariah got a lot of stuff wrong. Not everything he wrote about was accurate, but even if 10% of what he got was right, it's still fantastic because he opened our eyes and opened our minds to a whole new reality. So stop talking about Zecharia Sitchin was wrong. I don't care if he was wrong. Even if he was 1% correct, he opened the eyes of billions of people around the world and taught us that our mythology is our true history and is not just a figment of somebody's imagination. The story of the Anunnaki is that they came to Earth, who knows from where, from some other dimension. Now again, we can go into that discussion, and that goes into areas that some people will be very uncomfortable going. This is why when you start studying this, you've got to have an open mind and be prepared to get information that is going to make you feel very uncomfortable to start off with. Really uncomfortable. And it took me some time to process a lot of this and to digest it and to become comfortable with it, or to bring it into even to accept it as a possibility. But I've gone through it, I've done it, and it no longer scares me, because some of the stuff is really scary and disturbing to the point where you actually don't want to deal with it, because it's that disturbing. And we're talking about disturbing from a sense of evil, like pure evil, disturbing from a sense of understanding that there are beings and people and beings, other beings, possibly aliens, that have the capacity of magic, of manifesting things instantaneously, like the Green Lantern, the movie, that kind of reality. And you've got to be able to embrace that. Otherwise, just walk away from it and leave it alone. Don't mess with it. Study all this stuff. Take it in as information, as knowledge. Process it whichever way you want, but don't get stuck in it. Don't get obsessed with it and get stuck in one rabbit hole, because there are an infinite number of rabbit holes. I call it the terrible truth. We have to know the terrible truth. We have to deal with the terrible truth to be able to understand what not to do and where not to go, and learn from that so that we start to understand where we are going as a species and how we should be behaving and moving into a future that will be prosperous and beneficial to all of us. So we read in the Sumerian text that these beings called the Anunnaki came to Earth from wherever, and they came here to mine gold. And there you see the connection, the obsession with gold. And again, you can test it. You can see that our obsession with gold goes all the way to the book of Genesis. Genesis 2, and I'm digressing again, but it's important for people to understand the connectedness of all these stories. Yeah. Where did humans become obsessed with gold? Why? And when you read modern history books and that, you read all the BS, all the lies and deceptions. Why humans became obsessed with gold. And in Enslaved Species of God, I mentioned some of those lies because they saw gold and it was shiny and beautiful and they were drawn to it because of its beauty. Come on, really. Just people were worried about growing food and building communities and baking bread and surviving, and gold is a whole different thing. But because gold, you can trace back to Genesis 2. And I went and did this. And I'm sure many of your listeners will probably have done this themselves. So the first time we hear the mention of gold is in Genesis 2, before Eve has been created. So Adam is alone on earth. And God says, I want to take Adam to the land of Havilah, where the water is good, the land is good, and there is gold. Why would God be obsessed with gold? Can you see? Now, with that statement, we draw a difference between God with a big G, who doesn't care about gold, and the gods with a small g, that are obsessed with gold. So whoever was manipulating Adam and wanted to take Adam from this place to that place because there's gold, we need to start to read between the lines and start differentiating between when does the Bible refer to the creator of the universe, the God with a big G, and then the malicious, evil beings called the Anunna or the Anunnaki or the Elohim or the Nephilim or the Zanzimim, because those are the malicious beings that were abusing humanity. The sons of God saw the daughters of man and they came down from the heavens and that were the daughters of man and created a whole new species, and that was a serious event. There's a huge controversy about why they were obsessed with gold. I've reached a completely different conclusion now, and they were so obsessed with it that they would go to extreme lengths to get it, like extreme lengths to get it, which means it must have been really, really important to them. It's not just something that they wanted, it's something that they needed to survive. Okay, so if we can agree on that, then a lot of things will start making sense, because many of the things that we read about how the Anunnaki behaved, what they did, and why they cloned a new species called the Adamu race. Adam, same thing. So the Sumerian texts talk about Adamu, the Bible calls it Adam. And now we start seeing the connection between this ancient Sumerian texts that were much older than the Bible or any of the other ancient scriptures, and we start seeing the connection. So when they cloned the Adamu, and they created the Adamu species, they cloned it as a species to do the slave labor in the gold mines because they needed the gold and they were tired of doing all the work themselves. And there are very interesting references to these events in the Sumerian texts. So now you start seeing the connection between the Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki gods, the Anunnaki, the obsession with gold, why humanity was obsessed with gold, and the fact that the gold didn't belong to humans. We know this from when the European settlers started to arrive in the Americas and Africa and India. Whenever they found ancient civilizations, guess what they all had? Huge vaults of gold. All the Americans, El Dorado, the fabled cities of gold. And when you read the historic events of when the Spaniards arrived there, when the Portuguese arrived in Africa and in India, and all the gold they found everywhere, all these ancient civilizations around the world were obsessed with gold. Where did that obsession come from? And we can start tracing it back to our obsession of gold that we got from the Anunnaki.